But this is Judah, the lion. This is Judah. His name means the praise of God. And of course, from Judah we will get the highest praise, and that will be Jesus himself. So Judah is here. And I'm going to try to be as kind as I can with Judah. If you read his story, Genesis chapter 37, he's a natural-born leader. We know that much about him. He is able to keep his brothers. Go with me to Genesis 37, and we'll read his part. All of these people, really, we get to know them when they get involved with getting rid of Joseph. So, verse 23, we read this about him. Now, in verse 22, we read, "And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into the pit that in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, and deliver him to his father again." Reuben wanted to save him aside and then get him home quietly without the other brothers knowing. But now watch, here comes our good friend Judah sneaking on into here. "And it came to pass when Joseph was come into his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that he had with him. And they took him and they cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And he sat down to eat bread, and rather they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites." Now, are they related to the Ishmaelites? Yeah. Remember whose family? Ishmael. Their grandfather relations. Their great-grandfather, Abraham, had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Their grandfather and Ishmael were good friends. In fact, they came and buried the father together. So they have a relationship here with the Ishmaelites. So the Ishmaelites come and they sell him. They came from Gilead, and their camels bearing spices and balms and other such things as that on their way to eat. And Judah, now here's where we meet Judah. "And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we should slay our brother and conceal his blood?" Listen, okay, we're going to kill him. We're going to hide that fact. What are we going to get out of the thing? Guilty conscience. Look at how he's thinking now. Natural-born leader. Okay. "So come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is, after all, our brother and our flesh." And his brethren were contented with that. Okay. So, Judah no one really wants to kill Joseph. He was an aggravator to them. He was the snitch. Dad would send him out, "Go tell me what your brothers are doing." And he'd go do it. But when he was a kid, that's one thing. But as he gets a little bit older now, he's in his teenage years. You know, Mary says to J.D., "Go snitch on your sister. Go see what she's doing. Go spy on your brother for me and tell me what they're doing." You think they're going to get a little resentful toward J.D.? Sure. Sure they will. But see, Jacob was a lousy father. So far, everybody we have met in the Bible have been lousy parents. Have you noticed that? Abraham, lousy dad. His kids, where'd they learn it from? Lousy dads. More, now we got not only is Isaac, but then we come to Jacob. Lousy dad. And what do lousy dads produce? Lousy kids. And all of these men will be lousy dads too, with the exception of maybe one. Benjamin seems to be the only family-oriented one of all 12. Benjamin, the youngest, seems to be the most family-oriented, and probably because he was almost sold as well by his brothers. And it changed him. So he's a natural-born leader. He's clear of thought and action. We saw that. He had an idea. Oh, wait, why don't we make some money? Real crystal clear. He could see that there's something better than killing him. Why don't we get something out of it? So he's not only a man of action, not only a leader, because he's able to convince his brothers to go along with it. Wasn't too hard to sell because Reuben already wanted to save his life, but Reuben wanted to take him home. Jacob doesn't want him going home. He wants to make money on the deal. No wonder the Jews get their names from Judah. Had to make a buck, make a buck, make a buck. And that's what he's doing here, making a buck, right? So, but his actions very thoughtful. He's very clear, and his actions are very decisive. He's willing to stand by his word. We're going to see that later. We don't see it just yet, but later in life, later down the road, when after they sell Joseph, and then they go to get Joseph back, they meet Joseph, and Joseph asks them about their family. And somebody says, oh, I still have my father at home. Oh, is he well? Oh, yes, he's very well. And I've got a younger brother. Is he well? Oh, yes, he's very well. All right, tell you what to do. He feeds them. And next time you come back, bring your little brother. If you get hungry again, I will not give you any corn unless your little brother is with you. So they take the corn, they go home, and they eat, and everything goes well for a while, but they're still in the middle of that famine. So they have to go back and get more corn, but somebody says, listen, Reuben says, the guy in charge, he told us we can't come back unless we bring our little brother. And Jacob asked the question, who told him he had a little brother? Which of you guys said that there was a little boy at home? Well, Dad, we kind of just slipped. You know, we were feeling comfortable, and the guy was just asking us about you, and he seemed so concerned that, you know, we let it slip. So Judah decides, tell you what I'll do. I'll make sure Benjamin comes back. I'll make sure. There's this closeness between Judah and Benjamin. Their tribes stay very close. In fact, the tribe of Judah in the split, 10 tribes go north. Benjamin and Judah go to the south, and the 10 tribes are lost to history except for Judah and Benjamin, which become known as Judea. But that's Judah and Benjamin. They stay together from this point where Judah steps up for his brother and says, you can take my life, but not his. I promised my dad, and I'll stand by my word if it costs me my life. I told my dad I'd bring that boy home. And I will either bring him home or I will not return. I'll die fighting for him, is basically what he was saying. So he says to Joseph, you can't have him. You can't have him. I promised my dad that I would save this boy's life. We lost our son already. We lost a brother already. We're not going to lose a second one. And when Joseph hears that, remember, he goes off and he cries because he realized his brothers have changed. These brothers who were fighting and just at each other all of a sudden, this Leah's child is standing up for Rachel's child. Leah and Rachel never got along. So their boys never got along. And finally in life, Leah says to Rachel, I will defend you to the death. She says it through their children. Joseph can see that change in them, and it changes him. And of course, then he goes out and tells them who he is and changes the whole show. But you see, Judah, his good point, yes, he's willing to stand by his word. And of course, Jesus stands by his word. Every promise he ever made, good as gold, right? And so we get that picture very early on, even in Judah. Now, very clear of thought, action-oriented. That's our Lord. Clear of thought, very action-oriented. I have done this, I've done this. He went and he did this, he went and he did that. He was always a man of action, much like his ancestor. We see that detail in them. Of course, Judah wasn't as good. So both David and Jesus spring out of this man's root. And both of them, David, very clear of thought. He was a brilliant warrior because he could think clearly. He always had a plan, and it was easy for David to get men to follow him. And of course, it was the same thing for the Lord. He was easy to get men to follow him as well. So we see this good trait, this good thing, this natural-born leader. He gives birth to natural-born leaders. You see this good thought of clear thought and action. He gives birth to men of clear thought and action. We see also his willing to stand by his word, and he gives men. David was a man after God's own heart. David was a man who you could trust. Unless you had a pretty wife, then maybe not. So David and Jesus both come from his root. Now there are some bad things about Judah. First of all, it's his idea to sell Joseph. Natural-born leader, but he always looking for the profit. What is in it for me? What can I make? I mean, okay, so what? We kill my brother. What do I get out of the deal? Nothing. Then we have to go home and lie to Dad. What good is that? Why don't we, if we're going to lie to Dad and say that something bad, they're still going to take the blood home, they're still going to tell Dad that he was killed, and that the wolves ate his body and they can't find it. They're still going to tell that story to Dad, but we're going to say it with money in our pockets. So, you know, I would put that like on the bad side, you know, not necessarily something to be proud of. But this is Judah. These are the people. See, here's the thing about the Bible. It tells us all these people are in the line of Jesus. And it doesn't bother to say they were the best people. If man was writing this book, he would have good person after good person after good person after good person. Case in point, Catholic Church, for example. The Catholic Church created what they called the perpetual virgin. Mary was a virgin. She was so if she gave birth immaculately to Christ, how was Mary conceived? They went back and they changed history, and they have Mary immaculately conceived as well. Then what do you do with Mary's mom? And so they have to keep changing history, and they rewrote history somewhere in the 12 and 1400s to fit a picture that they had drawn up that doesn't exist. She wasn't a perpetual virgin. Jesus has brothers and sisters. They name 5 of his brothers. They just say and sisters. But see, the Catholic Church created a storyline that they had to go back and doctor history, because they realized, wait, how did she come in? How can she be immaculate? How can she be sinless if she's got a dad? Wait. So it ends up, they go back through history and keep making all the mamas, and it doesn't work. It just, see, that's the problem. Why? Because they wanted to make somebody super good. Now, take Jesus. Since he is the Lord, you would have to, if men were writing it like men did for Mary, if men were writing the story of Jesus, they would go back and make him a holy dad, and a holy dad, and a holy dad, and a holy dad. Otherwise, how do you get a holy guy? The Bible shows us that all of these men are filled with problems. These are the people that we base everything on. This is where Jesus gets his bloodline. Here in Judah, for example, one of the problems we're going to have with Judah is his son, Pharez, right, is in the bloodline who gives birth to Jesse and to David, and then eventually to Jesus. But Pharez is cursed. And he's cursed for 10 generations. That's how come David isn't the first king of Israel. Because David was the 11th generation from Pharez. The first 10 generations, Jesse, David's daddy, he was the 10th generation from Pharez. None of those people could be blessed by God, could be a king. They were cast off from God until the 11th. Past the 10th, the 11th generation, God started all over again. That's the generation of David. All coming from Judah. Why? Well, Judah had a son who died. The son had no children. So he gave, remember the story that the Pharisees come up with? And they say there was a man who had 7 children. And the first one married a wife, had no children. He died. The second one had. You know that story? That's the story of Judah. Judah's first son marries. He dies without any children, like on their wedding night. So the second son comes in. He dies without ever having any children through this woman. The third son comes along. He dies without having any children from this woman. The fourth son is just a little tiny kid, so Judah says to the woman, tell you what, if you'll stick around until this one grows up, she's going to, okay, what was she? 18, 19, 20? This little guy, she's going to have to wait around 16 years for him. She's going to be in her mid to late 30s by the time this guy is a teenager and able to get married. But Judah says, if you stay faithful to me, I'll give you that boy. Boy grows up. Judah doesn't want to give that woman her little boy. So she tricks him into it. The son, and what ends up happening is Judah ends up having a child with his daughter-in-law. Technically not a daughter-in-law because all the boys are dead, so there's no legal relationship there. It just looks a little strange. Jesus is descended from that relationship, though. See, if men were writing it, we wouldn't have put that story in there. You look at all the women in Jesus' life, and they're all questionable women, for the most part. You know, Bathsheba, a little questionable there. All right? It just, poor Judah. Jesus gets to us from him, but wow, what a clouded past. A story that you and I would not have written, nor would we tell. We can hardly tell it publicly. I'm trying to mask it as best I can in here, because it's not a Sunday school lesson. But that's the family that Jesus comes from. And so, because of that relationship, you can't have any children sitting on the throne for 10 years or 10 generations to get rid of that sinfulness. It took that long in order for God to consider sin was out of the cycle. Now, he did not keep his promise. Tamar was the daughter we were talking about. If you stay faithful, don't get married, stay right here in my house. When this little boy grows up, he is your husband. The boy grows up, good-looking kid. Dad decides he doesn't want to give the son to Tamar, so Tamar figures another way to have children. Bad. He would stand by his word if he gave it, but he broke it. See, even though that good trait, you know, it's good, he doesn't stand by his word all the time. He did when it counted, I suppose. Stuck up for his brother. But he's older now. And he reneges on his promise. So we almost have to willingness to. I didn't say he always did it. I just say he was willing to stand by his word. There's a difference between willingness and actually doing it. I am willing that I should never sin. Guess what? Not going to happen though, right? But I'm willing to try. And this is what he was willing to try to keep his word. Didn't always make it. Didn't keep his word to Tamar. Tamar in the family tree of Jesus. Married a son, he dies. Married a son, he dies. Married a son. And that picture is even used in the life of Jesus. Knowing he came from Judah. See the double-acted knife that they were using against him? It's in your family tree. The lesson, I suppose, we can get is that God is in control. Because Jesus still came to us, even though he wouldn't give his son to Tamar, Jesus still comes through Tamar. God's in control. God wanted, for whatever reason, God wanted that woman's blood in him. And he got it. He found a way. Through Judah and Tamar to get us Christ. Don't know why it was important, but there was something about those two that God knew needed to be in that blood. And he found a way. So God is in control. And God can use even the stupid things and the mistakes that we have made or done. God can even use those to his glory. He might shame us with it, but he'll ultimately find a way to bring honor and glory. So Judah then is willing to substitute his life. Remember? Don't kill Benjamin. Don't keep Benjamin. Take me instead. Right here. Lord, don't take Terry. He'll never pass the test. If he dies for his sins, he'll burn in hell, because after this, the judgment. Father, take me instead. And so he willingly gave himself. Picture, way back here in Judah, was the picture of Christ substituting himself for you and for me. Picture of Jesus keeping his word way back here for you and for me. See, when even we're just in the first book of Genesis, and already we see so much of the picture of the rest of the Bible already laid out there for us. We can already kind of see which direction everything is going to be going. And we aren't even finished with the first book. But that's Judah. Important, not a lot of detail, and what we are told about him is a bad story in his life. Now let's take a look at this last fellow, Benjamin. Good old Benjamin. What do we know about him? Well, not a lot, to be quite honest with you. He is the last. He was spoiled, probably protected. Let's use the word protected, I think. Not as spoiled as Joseph was. But after Joseph was taken away, you know Dad didn't let this boy go out of his sight. He probably had to be home before it got dark outside. I mean, he must have had the worst of all growing up, because his dad just hounded over him. He lost his favorite son. This is his brother by blood. Both of these are the children of Rachel, which was his dearest wife. Joseph is gone. Benjamin's at home. He lives in constant fear of losing Benjamin. So Benjamin, a little spoiled, sure. But boy, you got Dad breathing down your neck 24/7. Remember how he used to send Joseph out to the field to spy on his brothers? He didn't let Benjamin go out to the field. That boy probably grew up inside that tent, hardly ever saw the outside except for when Dad walked out there. And Dad was pretty old, so he probably didn't get outside all that much. Not a whole lot. As you can see, there's no bad news given about him. And there's only one. This is how little we know about him. There's only one good point ever made. Only one thing we ever told about Benjamin. We're told this: Benjamin wept with Joseph. That's it. Go to Genesis 35, verse 18. Look at it. Genesis 35. Now you figure somebody as important as Benjamin, the last of the family. Benjamin, by the way, is the ancestral father of King Saul. Remember, David can't be king, Jesse can't be king, and David's not ready yet. David's probably not even hardly born yet when Saul becomes king. So he has to put somebody in there as king before David to hold the spot so David could have it. And he chooses Saul. Saul is from the family of Benjamin, the smallest of the tribes of Israel. But look at 35, if you would, and down at verse 18. We see a little bit about him. And this is about his birth, okay? This is why he wasn't initially Dad's favorite. And it came to pass, as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Omai. But his father called him Benjamin. Dad doesn't like him because Mom dies giving birth to him. Tragic. So guess who gets the blame for killing Mom his whole life? The only thing that takes that away is when Joseph is dead. Dad sort of forgets it for a while. Because Benjamin doesn't become Benjamin. Benjamin becomes the substitute Joseph. Had to be a hard life for this guy. He is so sheltered, we know nothing about him. Go to the next section that I've got for you. Look at, go to chapter 45, verse 14. That's the only other thing that we're told about Benjamin. This is the only place there's any action at all. Anything that Benjamin does is found in chapter 45 and verse 14. This is all the action he ever does. The only active thing he does in the whole Bible. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. The only active thing Benjamin ever does that we're ever told about in the Bible is that when Joseph cried, Benjamin cried on his shoulder. The only action he ever does. So if you're looking for a lesson in what can we talk about, he hugged his brother and cried. That's all we know. Here he is, the 12 tribes, the kingly tribe, the only two kingly tribes, Judah and Benjamin. They stay together. They form a bond when Judah stands up for him. And Judah and Benjamin are always together. Throughout their families are. You look wherever they're always next to each other. Judah's always protecting little Benjamin. But the only thing we know about little Benjamin is right here. He cried on his brother's neck. The only action. Now here's the point. You and I get to heaven. And they write the story of our life. What action did we take for Jesus? They say, listen, we know he was born. We know he was born again. In fact, when he was born, he killed his mom. But that wasn't any action that he had done. So tell me something that Benjamin said that's famous. Tell me something that he did to change a life. 50 chapters in the book of Genesis. They sell their brother, starting what, chapter 30? So here we are now, 15 chapters into the story. 15 chapters. And in 15 chapters about the 12 sons, in 15, there should have been a chapter given to each boy, right? There isn't. The sad thing is there are some kids you don't hear anything about. But we got this on record. Benjamin wept, the only thing he ever did. The only recorded thing in all the Bible is that he wept with his brother. I have to wonder if God was to write a book about Christianity today. Number one, would we get mentioned? Number two, if he mentioned us, what would he say we said or did? What did we do that made a difference in Christianity itself? Not in our personal lives, because, yeah, we're always working for ourselves. I'm sure he did a lot. We know this much, he's a family man. When you read his story, his lineage, it's all about family. But we're not giving any action on it. No words. We just get this sense of him that he was a good family man. We don't have the sordid stories that his other brothers have. You don't have like Reuben, who stole his father's brides. You know, what a wicked guy that was, huh? You don't have stories like Judah. You don't have any of those about Benjamin. But there's nothing really about Benjamin, good or bad, that's talked about. Except Joseph wept and cried on Benjamin's neck, and Benjamin wept and cried on Joseph's neck. And he didn't even instigate it. His brother started it. You know, someone's crying in your ears, it's kind of hard not to cry. That's what we have. You have to say that's kind of a sad story. When people tell your story and they can't think of anything to tell about you. No heroic deeds. No lousy deeds. You're just a forgotten person. Nobody remembers you. Nobody recalls you. Your life was basically a non-existence. Why? Well, because Dad kept him in the closet, in the tent. Kept him in the tent all the time. I mean, look at his brother Joseph. Wow, what a story. He was hated by his brothers. He was thrown into a pit. He was sold to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites sold him as a slave in Egypt. He was sold on the market to a man called Potiphar. Potiphar's wife gets him in big trouble. Makes up a big, huge story. He ends up in prison. He's in prison for some time. He meets the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And out of this, he ends up becoming the prince of Egypt. Second in power only to the Pharaoh himself. Wow. And then there's my brother, who cried on my neck. Here's a man who, my brother, saved all of Egypt. He saved our whole family. He saved my mom. He saved my dad. He saved all of us. He saved the whole world from starvation, because everybody came to Egypt in the Middle East to get their grain. He literally saved the entire Middle East. And then there's my brother Benjamin. What did he do? Well, once he cried on my neck. That's it. Your brother goes off and saves the whole world, and wow, it's kind of hard. So I guess the point we have is we want to make sure we're not all a little Benjamin. We want to make sure that when we get to heaven, because remember, we are known just as we're known here. So if you're not known here, will you be known in heaven? If you are not known for doing anything for Christ here, what's the possibility of being known for doing anything for Christ in heaven?